chapter 2, real quickly, this is the clip I want to play for you. This is one of the primary texts that someone who denies particular redemption is going to throw at you. Let's go back. Remember Hebrews chapter 1, establishment of the supremacy of Christ, identification of him as Yahweh. Psalm 102, 25 to 27 is quoted in Hebrews 1, 10 through 12. All this stuff, very, very important. And then in chapter 2, the supremacy of Christ to the angels is continuing. And so verse 5, for he did not subject the angels, subject to angels the world to come, concerning which we are speaking. So again, a contrast, the supremacy of Christ. But one has testified somewhere saying, what is man that you remember him, or the son of man that you are concerned about him? You have made him for a little while lower than the angels. You have crowned him with glory and honor, and have appointed him over the works of your hands. You have put all things in subjection under his feet. For in subjecting all things to him, he left nothing that is not subject to him. But now we do not see all things subjected to him. But we do see him who was made for a little while lower than the angels, namely Jesus, because of the suffering of death, crowned with glory and honor. And then here is the key phrase they focus in on. So that by the grace of God, he might taste death for everyone. Specifically, hapos karati theou huper pantas giusetai thanatu. Now, and I'm looking at the clock and I've got limited time here, but just in passing, in case you're going, this text is important for another reason. Right, because of the textual variant. There is a textual variant here. It's I would consider very minor textual variant, but there are some manuscripts that instead of saying karati theou, by the grace of God, say chorus theou, apart from God. And if you're thinking about if what's kicking around your head is, this is one of the texts that Bart Ehrman uses when he wants to say that we don't really know what the New Testament message necessarily is, because this would completely change the concept in the book of Hebrews if it's chorus theou, apart from God, because this would mean that Jesus was separated from God in his death or something along those lines. Now, obviously, theologically, if that's what was being said, there would have to be an explanation of it, and it would not fit with so much else, which is in the book of Hebrews itself. But the reality is that the manuscript evidence for that reading is ridiculously weak. And Ehrman, I think, uses it primarily for shock value more than anything else. But that may be, if you were thinking about going, this text has another application, what was it? Well, that's what it is. So anyways, there is the phrase, so that by the grace of God, huper pantos, in behalf of all, he might taste death. And so if that's all you had, it sounds like a universal statement of Christ tasting death for all. But what you almost never hear the advocates of universal atonement doing, because Hebrews is a tough text to do this from, because there's so much in Hebrews that is amenable to and consistent with and flows from particular redemption, especially later on. Hebrews 7:24 almost screams it. And here, as is mostly the case, you are deriving this idea from, well, if it's saying this, then it must mean this. It's not a direct statement. It's just, it implies something. But what you don't hear is reading the rest of it, because it goes on with a gar. So for it was fitting for him, for whom are all things, and through whom are all things, hearkening back to the beginning of chapter 1, Christ's power of creation, in bringing many sons to glory. Now, it's interesting. It was Christ who was doing these things. And now now it's the Father. They're both united in their work in creation and now in salvation as well. Again, a theme we could expand upon if I had more time. For it was fitting for him, for whom are all things and through whom are all things, in bringing many sons to glory, to perfect the author of their salvation through sufferings. Now, you stop immediately. Who is being brought to glory? There is a specific people who have an author of their salvation, not just someone who makes it possible, Because when you look at the term that is used, archegon, leader, head, source, origin. If you want to say that he has tasted death for every single human being, was he the archegon soterios, salvation for everyone who does not experience salvation? There is a specific people here, and they are called in bringing many sons to glory. Many sons. Same terminology you'll found, for example, in Isaiah 53, the many who are justified by the sacrifice of the servant of Yahweh in Isaiah 53. So you have a specific group of people, many sons to glory. He is the author of their salvation, and he authors that salvation through sufferings. So we're still talking about the cross. We're still talking about redemption, the tasting of death. For both he who sanctifies and those who are sanctified are all from one Father, for which reason he is not ashamed to call them brethren. Does Jesus call brethren his enemies? Those who will be for eternity in opposition to who he is, even when they've had to bow the knee to admit that he is Lord, not in a salvific fashion, Philippians chapter 2. Will they be called his brethren there? The only way to try to fit a universalistic reading of Hebrews 2:9 in with 2:10 and 11 and then 12, which we'll look at in a moment, the only way to do it, folks, and see, I never see these folks dealing with this perspective, so they don't seem to feel the weight of this problem, is to become a universalist. And that's where many people have gone. I mean, you can come up with a universalistic reading of this, but Stephen Anderson is not a universalist. The vast majority of the people quoting Hebrews 2:9 against particular redemption are not universalists. But neither do they seek to consistently read their understanding from verse 9 into the explanation that comes afterwards. So we have people who are being sanctified. Take that to Hebrews chapter 10, see who that is. It's pretty clear. For he who sanctifies and those who are being sanctified are all from one Father, for which reason he is not ashamed to call them brethren. So whoever the everyone is in verse 9 is his brethren, sons to glory, and he is the author of their salvation in verses 10 and 11, saying, I will proclaim your name to my brethren in the midst of the congregation. I will sing your praise. Wait a minute. Brethren is here paralleled in Hebrew parallelism because it's a quotation from the Old Testament. To whom? The congregation. And again, I will put my trust in him. And again, behold, I and the children whom God has given me. Therefore, since the children share in flesh and blood, he himself likewise also partook of the same, that through death he might render powerless him who had the power of death, that is the devil, and might free those who through fear of death were subject to slavery all their lives. The only way you can read this is one of two ways. Either 2:9, when it says for everyone, is using the term everyone in the same way as Revelation chapter 5 and so many other places. Men from every tribe, tongue, people, and nation. And that therefore you have the congregation, the brethren, the sons that are brought to glory, the people who are sanctified, which is consistent with the rest of Hebrews, because that same term sanctification is to be used for those who draw nigh unto God by him, and he saves them completely. Or the only other consistent interpretation is this is universalism, so that he tastes death for everyone, everyone's in the congregation, everyone's the son that's going to be brought into glory. Everyone is going to be sanctified, either now or in a post-mortem state or whatever kind of universalistic interpretation you end up coming up with. The perspective expressed by Arminians, they stop at 2:9. They don't even pretend to then read their understanding through verses 10 and following. They just disconnect all of it. May I prove my point? Okay. I'm not going to try to, we've survived so far just doing this. I'm just going to play it for you. You can look it up on YouTube. I found it. Just put in Stephen Anderson Limited Atonement. It's one of the first ones that comes up. Just grab it and you can watch it if you want. I'll just play the audio and see if this isn't exactly how it works.
Where did Ivy turn? Hebrews 2? Look at verse 9. Since all doesn't really mean all, let's see if every really means every. Hebrews 2:9. But we see Jesus, who was made a little lower than the angels for the suffering of death, crowned with glory and honor, that he, by the grace of God, should taste death for every man. So did Jesus just die for certain people? I mean, how can you call yourself a Bible-believing Christian and say, I believe the Bible's the Word of God, and then look at this verse, Hebrews 2:9, and say Jesus didn't die for everybody? You're a liar is what you are. You're a false prophet is what you are. You don't believe this book. You believe in lies written by man. Whether that man's named John Calvin or whatever his name is, you are believing in lies and heresy. Let me tell you something. Jesus Christ tasted death for every man. I believe it. Do you believe it?
So there you go. Now, what did you get there? Did you get any exegesis? Did you get any thought? Did you get any context? Did you get any honest dealing with the text? No. Unfortunately, what you got is someone who knows how to manipulate weak-minded people. That's what you got. That's how cult leaders work. And sadly, sometimes even in the true church, we fail and utilize similar methodologies to manipulate people. But that is manipulation of people. That is not teaching. He did not take the time to read what any of us have written on this subject and go, oh, they connect 2:9 to 10, 11, and 12, and the consistency of the language, and go back to the Old Testament and do stuff like that. And so I need to offer a response to that. No, you read it, and then you insult people, and you get people amening, and you get their emotions going, and you've accomplished your purpose. That's all there is to it. That is manipulation. And of course, the best thing to do when you're acting as a false teacher and we're acting as a false prophet is to accuse everyone else of being a false teacher and a false prophet, so as to hide your own activities in that way. And that's what Steven Anderson does. It's not difficult to respond to this stuff, but the fact of the matter is, truly handling the text of Scripture takes time, and it requires you to lay aside the emotional aspect so as to establish the foundations first. And then you can get as emotional as you want about the beautiful truth that results, but you can't reverse the order. And that's what's going on with someone like a Steven Anderson.